Welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report. Today I'm joined by Jack O'Halloran and Andrew Saunders of Skale. We discuss Skale's unique approach to blockchain scaling and why gaming will be a killer application for Web3 in Brazil. All right, so I'm here with Jack O'Halloran and Andrew Saunders of Skale. Jack and Andrew, it's great to have you guys on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Amazing. So excited here to chat about what you guys have been building. You guys have a really novel platform, blockchain scaling approach, and you guys have some interesting things in the works in Brazil and Latin America as well. So I want to dive into that. But Jack and Andrew, would love for you both to just introduce yourselves really quick to kick things off.
Yeah, so hey, I'm Jack O'Halloran, CEO and co-founder of Skale Labs. Skale Labs is the core team behind the Skale network. We'll talk a little bit about what Skale here is in a minute. I've been doing... I started my career in enterprise software, started in mobile and mobile security, worked in AI and machine learning for almost a decade, and got into blockchain, started dabbling in blockchain on the side back in 2013, and full-time, got in 2017, and that's when Skale started. So happy to be here today.
Amazing. And Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Saunders. I'm the Chief Marketing and Growth Officer of Skale. Funny enough, started my career in Hollywood. So I was a bit of a bridge between celebrity talent, brands, and Silicon Valley. Then built kind of the in-house agencies for multiple mass media companies. And then right before crypto, actually built Amazon headquarters, global entertainment and culture practice. Been in crypto for about 3 years, was the first CMO of Arbitrum, then was the CMSO of a multi-chain aggregator, and now the first CMGO of Skale. So super excited to be here.
To get started, Jack, would love for you to give us kind of the elevator pitch of what is Skale? Like, what are you guys doing? What's the value proposition? What's the origin story? Why don't you give us some of that background?
Yeah, so I have to say this description has evolved over the years, and what differentiates Skale is that I can actually say it's a scalable blockchain, and not just theoretically talk about that, but I'm looking at the metrics here today, and we've had 4.5 million active wallets in the last 30 days on Skale. We've had over 458 million total on-chain transactions. In the last 30 days, 55 million on-chain transactions. And you know what? Zero gas fees for end users. So Skale was built essentially to make blockchain accessible to high volume applications that have lots of users, lots of transactions, and we can get into the nuts and bolts later, but effectively it's a horizontal scaling technique that leverages modularity and app chains and pooled security and a strong connection to Ethereum to bring, at the end of the day, a really great experience to end users.
Amazing. And I remember when I was at CoinDesk a few years ago, I was chatting with you about this. I first started diving into what Skale was. I think you had just done your token launch, and you guys were kind of coming out. This was pre, the scaling boom where everybody's a scaling solution, right? And I remember I was looking at this. So this is really interesting, and I couldn't quite figure out. I'm like, is this like a roll up? Is this an L2? Is this a side chain? Like, how do I even classify this? It was almost like totally outside the box of what everybody else was doing. So I was like, wow, this is super unique. And then you kindly got on the phone with me and explained how it actually worked. But we'd love for you to kind of give us an overview of just like the technical architecture of it. How is this all structured? And then how does this maybe compare with like some of these other app chains that we're seeing like on Polkadot and Cosmos and some of these other places?
Yeah, and I think that complexity is our strength and weakness. And it's our strength because Skale was designed by some of the most brilliant cryptographers and like network computer scientists and scalability computer scientists to solve a problem. It wasn't designed to follow a path of production. So a lot of blockchain was like, okay, we'll just build a faster layer one, or hey, this rollup thing's hot. Let's just do another version of that with a little tweak. We really designed something, and this was designed back in end of 2017, early 2018. At the same time, these other methods were being created. And we've talked about this before, but it's a little bit of a it's a two-party system, and we're the independent candidate here. But now here we are a few years later, and just having massive success with developers, and so to pull back to your question, so Skale is unique in the sense that one, it's anchored into the Ethereum network. So you've got Ethereum is its base, and to be honest, it's the structure of EigenLayer. If people are familiar with that architecture, it's very similar to that, but predates it by a few years. So you've got this this token on the ETH mainnet, all these smart contracts. And what happens is those secure another adjacent network. And so we actually get this shared security property between Ethereum and Scale, because there's staking and slashing and network operations, and all of these things that happen in this other network are controlled by Ethereum, by smart contracts on Ethereum. So then you go over to Scale, and there's one set of validator operators, which means, for the less technically speaking, just a lot of computers in one system working together. But guess what? That one system, that one set of nodes can have many, many chains integrated and built into it. And this is where you get these like Cosmos and Polkadot type comparisons, where you have, numerous chains. But the thing is, these many chains are pooling security into one group of validators. So even though you might have a chain that has less concurrent validator operators, to attack that chain, you'd have to probabilistically attack 2/3 of the entire base. And then on top of that, there's security anchored back into the Ethereum mainnet. And so you get these like 3 layers of security. And so that's, I hope that, it's hard to talk about these like technical topics and try to keep it simple. I hope that I achieved that somewhat. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think maybe we can touch on a bit more kind of how this fits into like the modular versus monolithic, framing, I guess that has been prevailing here the last couple of years with this kind of blockchain scaling race, where you're either an L2 or you're an Ethereum killer, or you're like what other options are there essentially. So maybe Andrew, let's turn over to you. So you've got a pretty interesting background coming from I guess like Web2 maybe isn't necessarily the right word, because you were just doing more, you weren't necessarily like in Web2 tech, but you were doing like branding and all sorts of cool activations and marketing with Amazon and NBC Universal and some of these other places, and then moved into Arbitrum a couple of years ago. And so your focus is really on kind of marketing, ecosystem growth. Maybe talk about like why you decided to join this project for one, and what are you guys really focusing on right now? It sounds like you guys have the technological like base in place, but what's your kind of your growth efforts looking right now?
Yeah, great question. In terms of why I chose it, I would actually say, go to my Twitter. It's at Andrew Saunders. I pinned a thread, which is very data oriented, and it kind of talks about all the data points that impacted my decision. But just to kind of take it a step further, I think, candidly, there's not a ton of marketing talent in the industry that comes from, traditional marketing backgrounds. I had a lot of very big chains reach out, and I think, when I started to look at the numbers, what I said to myself was, wow, I actually do believe in this architecture. And when I talked to builders that had built on other types of solutions, like we've talked about, they've pretty much told me, bar none, like this has been the best builder experience for them. I think second to that, and I would add to that, I think in terms of builder experience, again, a lot of these folks are trying to build for mass adoption. And I think what's going to happen with some of these other architectures, as we've kind of already seen with gas fees even surging sometimes, is it's going to make it inaccessible for a lot of crypto curious normal people to come on, right? Whether it's the technology that's blocking them or whether it's the price of gas, right? So I think the other thing that I've noticed in general is there's a very, very large active user base here. And I think part of that is tied to kind of two things. One, I do think the gasless architecture is a huge driver of that, right? Because I'll give you a great example. If I wanted to play a game on a layer 2, and I've done this before, gas fees start surging every single day. I'm processing transactions on the game. It wasn't uncommon for me to be spending anywhere from $100 to $200 a month on a game just to play it, right? Whereas on Scale, I could just start playing that game for an entire month. I've racked up 0 gas fees. Maybe I'm earning rewards. Maybe I'm earning NFTs, things like that. The other thing is, I think because of the caliber of the builders that are building here, you're also seeing a lot more of this kind of mass adoption type nature. And what I mean by that is there's 4 of our games right now that are already on the Epic Game Store. You can download them through the Epic Game Store. You can discover them on Twitch. And the next thing you know, someone's actually playing this game and not even realizing there's blockchain on the back end, right? So when we talk about, the future of crypto and the invisible blockchain and all of that, I mean, this is kind of case in point at its finest. And then, other things I kind of pointed out in that thread, there was an independent research study done by Dartmouth University, and it found that Scale was the fastest, both in terms of TPS and also finality. I think Solana came in at number 2, and then you actually see a pretty massive drop off from there to other chains. So I think, to that point, like the caliber of the tech and the caliber of the team is pretty second to none in my opinion. So these were all kind of signals for me. And going back to kind of what you and Jack were talking about, I think, we were talking when I first got here, and I was like, it just feels like there's an awareness issue, and that's about it. And I think where that comes from is we're not an alt 1, quote unquote. We're not an L2, quote unquote. So we're not a part of, these narratives. We're over here building something different. And that's kind of how I like to talk about us a lot of times is I'm like, we're built different. We were built different from day one. We're built different to be built better, right? And whether that's the modular nature from day one, whether that's, built to actually support high throughput dApps, I think that that's actually a huge strength of Scale. And then the other thing I would say is like, we're definitely seeing a lot of global usage. At previous chains that I worked with, we tended to see a lot of kind of concentration in certain geos. I think a lot of, very high income, high net worth areas. I think one of the things that excites me about Scale is I'm seeing real active users all over the world. And I do think, again, the zero gas fee really enables kind of everyone to use blockchain. And then in terms of kind of growth efforts coming up, I would say big things are, really kind of leaning into the fact that we are built different, making sure people really understand what that means and why that's beneficial for them. We'll start to do a lot of brand awareness type activities just so that people start to become more familiar with the name, start to understand the value propositions and differences. And then we actually have some pretty exciting updates coming soon as well. So I would say those are some of the big things. And then last thing I would just add, and knowing that your audience is in Brazil, we are very focused on places like Brazil. I think for us, we're not only getting a lot of great PC games that are launching, we're also getting a lot of mobile first games, casual games, mobile first applications in general. And, having actually worked in Brazil for about 15 years, both for Amazon and for a company called Tastemade, definitely understand that audience well. And if we can bring, fun games that provide an easy onboarding and don't cost people $200 a month to play them, I think there's a huge opportunity for both, folks in Brazil and ourselves.
I want to come back to this Brazil point a bit later in the show, but before we dive in, I really want to kind of focus on the gas fees component. And you guys have a really interesting way that you've just as part of the architecture, the gas fees are like not paid by the end user ultimately. And I was hoping you guys could maybe explain how that actually works, because I know in crypto, like once you've been in crypto long enough, people come along with these promises of like, oh, like infinite scalability, no gas fees. It's kind of like, okay, that's too good to be true, But like, how are you guys arranging it so that the gas fees are ultimately not paid by the end user?
Yeah, so there's 3 layers of this, and I'm going to start with the most simple layer. So the most simple layer is just developers pay in advance for space in the network instead of having gas fees. Okay, so if let's say I have a game and I want to join the Nebula chain that's got 100 games, and it's one of the top blockchains in the world, and it's called Nebula, and it runs on Scale. It's part of this, it's one of our shards, or but that has to be paid for. So those developers have to buy Scale tokens. They rent a piece of the network, and then they can run up to a certain capacity. And it's almost like if you're taking an Uber or Lyft, like you don't have to pay the AWS or Google Cloud server fee. You just pay for the ride, and guess what? Uber then pays their server fee on the back end. So that's the simple explanation. The second layer below that is it's actually built different all the way down to the consensus. Okay, so a lot of chains have relayer models and like subsidy models where you can just say, hey, let me just put gas here, and then when people try to utilize gas, we'll just pay for it. It's like this interception. The problem with that is that's the unit economics are really bad. So Andrew is saying, oh, I was playing these games, I was spending $200 a month. Well, guess what? That's because the unit economics aren't good. So on Scale, because the developers are renting this space in advance, it's almost like you're renting a car, and you just rent the car for the month, and you might drive it not at all. You might drive it the whole 24/7, but there's one fee, or you're just paying by the mile. And so the unit economics end up being really good because validators are getting paid constantly, whether you're, utilizing the blockchain or not. They just are getting paid to run space. And then the third layer is, okay, well, are there capacity constraints then? Because what if gas is really good at making sure that if too many people want to use a service at once, that you have like a gating system, like Uber and Lyft example again. Oh, hey, everyone wants a ride. Well, there's surge pricing. I'll pay more to get my ride now. Well, that's how gas works. On Scale, you don't have that. So, but the thing is, we have this elastic nature where the network can continue to grow and we can add more and more chains. And the capacity is already just, across the entire network. Dartmouth had Scale at like the fastest blockchain at 397 TPS, but that was just one chain. There's 20 chains, so that's like 7,000 TPS. And it's really easy to add new chains. And so we are able to fix capacity issues at the chain level. The last thing is, there's something called S-Fuel that does a lot of the protective elements that gas does, that to like prevent spamming and to, again, have capacity. It plays a role in capacity management, but there's a very sophisticated system and an economic system of chain pricing to deliver zero gas fees. It's not just, hey, we've got a relayer and we do all of that, or the network does all of that to make it cost effective for developers and cost effective for users at the end of the day.
Very cool. Very cool. And you've talked a bit about gaming as really a use case that you've seen taking off here, both in terms of, the number of games and also the people playing these games from what it sounds like. And hoping you talk a bit more about that. And then also maybe even looping in some of the broader context around blockchain games more generally. It seems like maybe this is just the corner of Twitter that I've been occupying recently, but it seems like there's a lot of like VC types who are kind of like, we poured all this money into blockchain games and like we're not really seeing any results. But I don't know. I don't really follow this ecosystem super closely, so I don't know what's what. But hoping you guys can maybe talk about some of the successes you're seeing here, and maybe kind of how that fits into the broader gaming landscape.
Yeah, for sure. I can take it, and then Jack, maybe you jump in on the DApp radar stuff a little bit. I would say CoinGecko did a study where they actually looked at specifically active game addresses. And once again, we came in at number one. We've got over 230,000 active game addresses on our chain. And then just for comparison, Ronin's about half that at 105,000. Polygon 42,000, and then drops all the way down to Arbitrum at about 1,500. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of real gamers on our chain, and I think part of that, and I talked about this before, is we're not just seeing crypto natives come in and play these games. I think we're seeing real gamers and crypto curious folks come in, and I do attribute some of that to things like the fact that we have these 4 games on the Epic Game Store. I would say one thing that I've noticed is when games that are built on other chains either multi-chain to Scale or migrate to Scale, what tends to happen after that is any active gamers that were on that previous chain end up moving over with them. And it makes total sense because, you're playing this game on Polygon, you love this game, you're paying gas fees. Now it's available in 2 locations. You can come to Scale, play the same game, and incur none of those costs. And again, much faster, both in terms of TPS and finality. So I think from a user experience standpoint, it's superior. I think going back to your bigger question, and I can talk about this because I've now worked at multiple chains. I think the problem with early games was they weren't actually games, and they weren't actually fun. I mean, most of them, what you were doing was you were going to a website every day. You were, quote unquote, reporting for duty, clicking a button, processing a transaction fee, coming back the next day, repeating the process. And it looked and felt nothing like a traditional game. And I think the difference now is what we're seeing, especially at Scale, is a lot of these game developers aren't first-time game developers. They're folks that have built, PC games, console games, mobile games already. And now what they're saying is, hey, if we add a blockchain element to this stuff, we can make these games more interesting and more dynamic. And the best example I always give is, for folks that play something like a CSGO, you win some sort of skin, for your weapon by playing the game for a long time or unlocking a certain level. You don't own that asset, right? Whereas in a game like Haven's Compass, you do, right? And that asset can have value, and that asset is under your control and your ownership, and you can do with it as you wish, right? I think part of it is we're seeing real games now, and a lot of these folks, they are building on things like Unity or Unreal. But if you go into the Epic Game Store, for example, check out things like, Haven's Compass, Stray Shot, World of Dipians, Fussy Fox. These all look and play like real video games, right? And I think that's the big shift that's happened. And then I think, again, just to kind of point it out once again, there's no gas fees, right? So if one of these games lived on another chain, your gameplay can be interrupted by gas fees, or better example, some of these chains are typically prone to crashes. You're at the final level, at the final boss, you're about to win the game. Now, all of a sudden the chain goes down, the game goes down, you've got to start over. You don't have those issues on Scale. So I think that's pretty much sums it up for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I want to add one other thing I'm going to say something a bit volatile. This might be fun and exciting. So I just want to say that like crypto is driven by narratives. I think we all know that, right? But the thing is, these narratives are often crafted by people with like very little knowledge about how the world works. Okay. And, there's these set of people that are deep researchers that might have these they're very smart people, but they're, kind of projecting what's going to work and how it will work. And it causes then this whole like cascading venture capital movement. And then, people like, and we see this happening with all these L1s that are launching with their airdrops and everyone kind of dogpiling into it. But at the end of the day, a lot of this is just EVM and EVM and EVM. And we have like very little, like, you have very little differentiation as it, relates to a developer or a user. And Scale has this massive difference for the user in terms of gas fees, and the developer in the same way, and just performance. And we don't just use EVM, it's this high performance C++ Ethereum. And anyways, that's a long way of kind of going to this, like, there was this, unique solution that game developers, who are, I'd say, the most difficult to please, they have the highest performance needs, and gaming often dictates what will happen with infrastructure because it will beat up bad infrastructure. And so we just have won deal after deal after deal because as soon as people get into testnet, they don't go back. and also, like, there's this big open source community that just is like really gathered around the technology. And so one of our weaknesses has been, hey, how do we tell the world this? And it's really awesome to have Andrew here to tell that story and kind of like counter narrative back. But it's just exciting to see like game devs be very pleased, and that's why we do so well in gaming, because they need what we have. If you just have some people swapping tokens, and you're just you don't really care, but if you have high performance needs, you care a lot about performance.
I would just add to what Jack said. I think one thing that I found interesting, going back is, you're seeing real games, you're seeing them in places like the Epic Game Store. Those are attracting real gamers. And now what we're seeing is a bit of the ripple effect, because we have many dApps right now that are generating north of 10,000 daily active players, real gamers. And so I think what's happening is, some of these games are funneling in, again, real gamers and users. They're then discovering other games, and then that's driving real users to other games. So there's a bit of that symbiotic effect that's happening. Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys have been able to build a platform that really, it kind of, the chicken and egg effect or the chicken and egg problem, I should say, has been kind of solved here, where it's like, okay, you've got the right experience for developers to want to come and build their games on the platform because you've got the correct infrastructure. And then also for the users, you can play the game without, you have a quality product that they can play. And then the gas fee problem has been solved essentially. So you've kind of got the ideal environment for both of those groups essentially. And then maybe let's, I want to kind of come back to the gaming subject a bit later when we talk a bit more specifically about Brazil and Latin America. But maybe before we jump into that, what other use cases are you guys seeing? Are you guys leaning into any of these other kind of like AI, DeepIn, some of these other applications? Is that something that has been, there's been an upswell of interest, or are there any other areas that you'd want to highlight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, again, going back to what Jack said, and I'll let him add to this, we intentionally built this for scalability to the masses, right? And so when you think about high throughput, you're thinking about applications that typically generate a significantly large amount of transactions, right? And so if we look at kind of the different categories of crypto, I would say, some of the things that aligns with very, very nicely are 1, gaming, 2, AI. Both Jack and I have worked in AI and machine learning for years, so we know that space. And then 3, social. And I don't even say social-fi, because I think, again, as someone that worked with early social media platforms in Web2, I've seen the ability for those apps to really scale extremely quickly. And so again, if you're launching a social app, whether it has a financial component or not, you're going to start to see a very large amount of transactions very quickly. So I think like those are 3 that align very, very well for us. And then Jack, you can add to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's, where there's high volume and lots of users, you'll find scale. So deepen AI, decentralized social. I mean, and I'm excited about some of, I think some categories are doing better than others. I think you mentioned there's a little people like, hey, what's going on with my gaming tokens? Well, I think gaming is going to be a really good example of where real fundamentals drive the growth, not just because the speculation market is being like sucked up by meme coins. And so you're going to just see the best games that have real utility of their tokens perform well. And it's, which is great. And I think you're going to see that happen too. And like, there's exciting stuff in decentralized science or DeSci. There's exciting stuff in, DePIN has so many different applications. Xord is a DePIN project on Scale. It's also an AI project. It's a, that has this massive user base all over the world that is providing something that could not be provided in a centralized system. So I think we're going to see some cool stuff throughout the rest of this year. And which is, the last time you and I talked in 21, we were talking about how all this stuff was going to happen. It's fun to see it happening.
That's very cool. Very cool. And you mentioned that your user base is pretty well distributed around the world, which I think is a very positive indicator. And it's not just, whales in a few select regions that are using the platform, but you've got a nice distribution. And wanted to pivot the conversation here to talk about like why are you guys specifically interested in Brazil, Latin America? Andrew, I know you've done a lot of work here in the past, so that's kind of the obvious connection.
Yeah.
But just maybe to kind of preface, I think you do have a pretty big community of gamers here in Brazil. There's esports, professional. I was just at a studio a couple weeks ago of like a professional esports team where it's like they it's kind of crazy. It's like this is like an actual sport, right? It's like they have like a trainer who they have a nutritionist, they have like their fixed schedule, so there's a big gaming community here. The blockchain gaming community has been, has kind of gone through its ups and downs, I guess, like it has everywhere else, but it's still pretty like vibrant. And I think, the ability to, farm airdrops and like participate in these kind of games where there's some sort of financial incentive. This is the type of thing that Brazilian people like pick up on pretty quickly. So anyway, we'd just love to kind of get your thinking on why is this a market that you're interested in right now, and what do you guys think you have to offer to this particular market? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll hit it first. So I think like, one of the things I always think about, even before I join a company is like, who's the ideal user? What does that user base look like? Where is that user base based? What is their behavior like? Because these are all things that as a marketer are really important, right? And so I think for me, like I'll tackle kind of the ideal user in kind of two different categories. I'll start with gaming, right? But I think for gamers, what it really boils down to is if you're a real gamer that actually loves gaming, that actually loves games that are fun to play, this is a great place for you to explore, right? Because again, you can play all these games, you're not paying gas fees on them, you're discovering the one that you love the most. Now you're playing that game, pretty religiously, and you're not paying to play it, right? So I think again, in regions where there are a lot of game lovers and game aficionados, this ends up becoming kind of a really great home for them, right? So that's the gamer side. And then on the non-gamer side, and I guess I'll kind of maybe put that all pulled together into maybe like crypto curious folks. I think what we find is, again, there's no gas fees, right? And a lot of our projects are fairly new. A lot of our projects are pre-TGE. And so what I find is, for folks that are either, interested in pre-TGE projects or folks that are new to crypto, they can come on Scale, they can try out new dApps, they can learn new things, and they don't have to pay to do it, right? And so again, when I think about a lot of my personal friends that are in Brazil, they're not natives, they're crypto curious folks. If I go to them and say, hey, check out this fun game on the Epic Game Store, they're like, cool, yeah, great, that sounds fun. Or if I say, hey, this project over here is pre-TGE, they just launched a quest page, go on there, do the quest, check it out. They'll do it because there's no cost for them to do that, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. So I'll let Jack add to it, but I think those are kind of the two types of users that I see quite a bit on the chains.
Yeah. I think for me, like one, it's, top 10 global economy. So it's a huge, fast growing area. So I also see it's like, I think Brazil will grow faster than other economies as well. Two, I think it's very, poised for huge Web3 growth. I think there's a lot of reasons why you're going to see a lot of like the value of blockchain, the value of Web3 provides even more value to people in Brazil than other countries because of dynamics of the economy. And the three, I think, is just like a phenomenal culture. And I think one that, like, that we vibe with, that we like. I mean, I think we all have a lot of Brazilian friends, and I think of, like, like the products we support, and I just feel like, you know, it's actually been such a major focus for us, and we're excited to go, bring people there and visit, hold events. We have lots of partnerships popping up now too with different studios and developer groups, and yeah, we're just really excited about the region in general.
And I would just add to what Jack said. I think the other thing, having worked in Brazil for a number of years myself, like, it is a very mobile first country. And I think one of the challenges with, crypto is a lot of the entry points for a lot of these applications tend to be, PC. But what we're seeing on Scale is a lot of builders that are actually thinking about mobile first building. And so you'll be able to download these games or some of these projects, on the Apple Store or on the Android store. And again, like, that just becomes a great bridge for a lot of mobile users.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's been one of my main criticisms of blockchain games up to this point, is it's like, the gaming industry writ large, made this shift to mobile in like 2008, right? So we're sitting here building games for people, and like, like we're in a time machine going back 20 years building games for people in the mid 2000s, right? When it's like, God, that ship sailed like 15 years ago, So I think that mobile first approach, I think, is going to be a huge catalyst for adoption, just for the reasons you mentioned there.
Sure.
Wanted to maybe talk a bit about just like what kind of, if there's folks here in Brazil who are like listening to this and they're like, wow, that's really interesting. I want to find a way to get involved in this, whether I'm a builder, I'm a developer, or I'm just a person who likes these play to earn games. I like kind of this whole world of airdrop farming and trying to kind of get in early on things, whatever. And I like the idea of not having to pay gas fees on it. What's like the easiest maybe touch point for these folks to maybe get involved?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the easiest way to jump in is really just to go to the website's scale.space, and then you'll find our ecosystem page there, which you can also kind of sort through and categorize by category. So if you're a gamer and you want to go play a bunch of games, you just select gaming, all of those games pop up. If you're an AI enthusiast, all of those AI apps will pop up. And then I'll give you a little alpha, currently in the process of actually revamping our ecosystem site. So there'll be a lot of additions to that, but also a lot of ways you can sort through them. So for example, pre-TGE, you'll be able to see all of the dApps that are pre-TGE if you want to go and experiment on those. Yeah. Maybe
talking a bit more broadly about just kind of like your roadmap. Thinking of roadmap as far as like, short-term, mid-term, long-term. If you guys want to kind of cover a bit on that front. And then also, is there any interesting, partnerships or kind of developments that are already like live that we should know about, or things that might be coming in the pipeline that we should be watching for?
Yeah. So I think first off, there's a huge release that's coming really soon. Okay. And Andrew, I always, at least I have the CMO here. I always make the CMO mad because I like leak things before I'm supposed to. But is the name public? Can we say the name?
No. I'll give you some alpha. I'll give you some alpha. Ready?
Okay.
That's all you get.
Okay, so there's a really big release coming later this month that I think is transformative. It'll take Scale. Scale already is the fastest blockchain in time to finality, but it adds even more, optimization for networking and finality to just be even faster, and not just like faster throughput, but faster closure. And our finality is instant, but the time to finality will be even faster. And then there's a lot of other features that will open up, roll out new partnerships. So lots of partnerships with custodial wallets, especially mobile first custodial wallets and mobile first ramps, NFT marketplaces. So this thing has a lot in it. You're going to start reading about it really soon, and you'll get this branding that I'm really glad you're here. I probably would have blown that and, and release that early, but that's one big thing. And the longer term roadmap, there'll be a zero knowledge proof integration to Scale. That's, Scale's open source. So these things, the core team doesn't control entirely, and like they're voting oriented, but there's a lot of effort and building happening around zero knowledge proofs, and not for every transaction, but having like, almost like a funnel for like really important transactions to leverage that when they want to pay more. That will be another big feature. And then just lots of games and AI products. And if you go to you can see a lot of these that are announced already. And hey, right now, as of today, we're in the top 5 of all blockchains in transactions and unique active wallets on DApp Radar. And you can go see some of these games and play them today, like World of Dipian, Spixuti, 5 Stars. Hold on, I'll tell you. Bit Hotel, Stray Shot. What else? And Haven's Compass. Go play Haven's Compass, especially if you're a big gamer. And then there's other stuff. There's exciting stuff coming, but we are under NDAs and just cannot say. Yeah. We cannot announce those, but keep tuned. And
I'll give you alpha. There'll be names that even normal people will be familiar with.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. All right. That's all right. Well, you got my attention, so that's good. That's really. I'm excited to see what you guys have in the works here. So I want to just kind of move back to what we were talking about earlier, kind of, talking about like just what you guys are building and kind of how it fits in with the broader, kind of modular versus monolithic dichotomy, I guess, and how you guys are building something that's really almost like a third rail of sorts, or like a third way, I should say. It's like this kind of outside the lines of how this dichotomy has been framed by blockchain marketing people. But I was hoping you guys could maybe talk a bit more about like just how does this compare, or how does this fit in with like the broader kind of just ecosystem of whether it's like L1s, like kind of ETH killer type chains, or like Ethereum, layer 2s in kind of the modular stack, or even obviously like Solana seems. I think most people would think of Solana as being kind of like the go-to chain for like blockchain games right now. At least that's the first one that comes to my mind. But maybe how are you guys kind of like positioning yourselves, maybe like both in terms of like, I mean, maybe on like the tech side and also on like kind of the narrative side. I'd be interested in both those takes.
Yeah, we talked a lot about modular. And so Skale, I'd say, is the first modular blockchain. And the thing is, modular is a very highly utilized term in technology. It's not a new thing. And it means you have this modular build, like you have these modules that, but one, separate risks. So if one module breaks, the other ones don't. But 2, they separate performance. You can have more performance. You're not trying to do everything in one big bucket. You're kind of partitioning it out. And if you think about Skale has each chain is its own module. And if one chain has an issue, it doesn't contaminate other chains, right? If it breaks, it doesn't hurt the other chains. And also they have bifurcated performance. So like if one chain's like really busy, it doesn't even interrupt the other chain. And we have this ability to like elastically grow those to horizontally scale. So one of the promises, like, oh, we have modular chains because we have all these app chains that then these app chains can keep growing and growing and growing to fit network demand. But one thing we didn't integrate is we didn't integrate rollup. So the modularity police is out there saying, hey, if you don't have a rollup, you're not modular, even though we have modularity built in every component and we've been calling it that forever. And it's just, the thing is, we intentionally don't do it. So, and I'll tell you why. So you have we utilize Ethereum security, rollups utilize Ethereum security. We use it in a preventative fashion. We prevent bad things from happening by making sure that, there's slashing, there's node assignments, there's rotation, there's all these operational things that make it really hard to attack the network. And then each chain can just process its final transaction. It's its own L1 in a lot of ways, but it's not its own L1 because it's built into Ethereum. Now, a rollup doesn't do any preventative things. What they do is they have a centralized server, but then they try to do this, proof. They're trying to prove that things aren't wrong. So they basically, there's nothing to stop it in advance, but they're saying if something goes wrong, we'll be able to just unwind it through these mechanics back on the mainnet. So they use it after the fact. The good thing about that is you can just say, hey, if you actually had your fraud proofs turned on, you could guarantee nothing bad happens. Instead of trying to prevent it, you just guarantee it. The bad thing is it costs dramatically more. And so then they have to stack these like another layer on top, and then another layer on top, which still aren't that cost effective. And then you have all these latency and you're like, oh, I actually want to pull my money out. Well, you have to wait 12 hours. Sorry. Oh, you wanted to, you're just limited. You just really limit, you make costs higher and performance worse. And so maybe I went too long there, but Skale is it's very similar but there's some like key differences that are intentional because we were concerned more about making developers and users life better than like making sure Ethereum keeps capturing more fees. And I think if your goal was to make sure Ethereum keeps capturing more fees, you're not really optimizing with the user in mind. You're optimizing with your ETH bag in mind.
Yep. And I would even add to that, like, I agree with Jack, and I think Jack's 100% right. Why do I believe that? I was the CMO of a roll up, and now I'm the CMO of something built very different. And so, when we first kind of did a deep dive together on architecture, like, it all just made sense to me. Yeah.
And then, so if I'm a builder, say like I want to, I have an idea for a blockchain game. I want to spin something up. Um, you know, would I be able to spin up my own chain proper on using the Scale platform, one of these side chains essentially, or are there like existing chains I would just plug into, and then maybe if like my game reaches a certain amount of volume, I could somehow like pour, like how does that work exactly? Like how would that work if I'm just starting out?
Well, the cool thing is no people are involved. Like that's the beauty of this is you could say, hey, I want to run a Scale chain. You can actually interact with contracts on the ETH mainnet and deploy a chain and you pay for it. And you could actually like deploy a chain. It's pretty cool um, how essentially it's a decentralized autonomous system. But then if you want to have your own chain, you better be ready to have a lot, you better need that space because it's going to cost a lot. Okay. But and so let's say you weren't really big, you just, hey, let's go to Nebula, or you go to Calypso chain, you go to Europa chain, and you kind of go to these like similar products. So if you're an AI product, you're going to go to Calypso. If you're a game, you'll go to Nebula now. But let's say you're doing really well and you're using up so much space, maybe you go start your other chain, or you just take four other dApps, like, hey, let's just the four of us split this and we can use it as much as we want. We don't have to like, because at some point Nebula, maybe when it has 400 games on it, might start getting a little overloaded, and people are gonna, and it'll probably be before that. People just say, hey, let's just go and just get our own unit going. And the thing is, these are all like really simple, easy selections. Just like if you're running Google Cloud or AWS, you're like, hey, let's run these instances. Oh, let's not use this, or let's add more of this. We give the network gives developers those types of optionality.
Amazing. That's super helpful. That's super interesting. And I think it sounds like that's like you guys have built this with like the user experience, the builder experience really in mind. So that's, you don't necessarily have to be like a super technical person and, super wonky person with this stuff to be able to deploy something, which I think is super important.
And I started my first enterprise software company in 2008, and my co-founder Stan Kladko is a founder in enterprise software as well. And when you build things for enterprise, you have to build with it's all about configuration and like deployment options and like cost elements. Like, oh, it's not just one size fits all. You have to kind of bake in this like, I'd say, configurable modules that like impact performance and cost. And Scale was designed in that same light. And Andrew knows that from his AWS days. Like it's all about optionality without breaking something. You don't want to build something like, oh, wow, we need a different size. We better start from scratch. Like, you have to have these building blocks. But I have to say, it's one of the less told stories about Scale because it's, we're just like, there's a lot of things to talk about. And we're still just trying to like tell people the basics, and developers get it, and the light bulb turns on. They're like, oh my gosh, how come not everyone's doing this? So.
And just one last question here, Andrew. I want to return kind of to your history in Brazil. You spent a number of years here in previous jobs, like working and doing marketing efforts, campaigns here in the Brazilian market, and wanted to kind of get some additional color from you around what do you think like a successful kind of like blockchain gaming marketing approach in this market could look like, because as far as I know, like nobody's really done that before with regards to like blockchain gaming specifically. But just given kind of your background, your familiarity with the culture here, I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, for sure. So like we talked about this earlier around kind of the mobile side, but I used to work with like King, for example, in London, who does Candy Crush and like a lot of these really big mobile games. But my personal opinion is knowing kind of the mobile first nature of the country, knowing that a lot of folks there are tech savvy, tech curious. I would even say like tech setters is a term I've used before down there. I think the key thing is, again, like bringing games into market that really align with the user base, right? So I think things like mobile first casual games, things that maybe lead into like actual interest points of folks in the country, whether that's certain sports or certain genres. But I think in general, it's really about kind of meeting folks where they want to meet us, right? And then beyond that, I do believe, again, there's, you want to think about a combination of both, Web3 marketing tactics, but also more traditional marketing tactics. And, you and I talked about this quite a bit, but when I was at Amazon, a lot of what we were doing was marketing premium entertainment and content down there instead of the Amazon brand, because we thought that there was a better value proposition there for folks in Brazil. And then over time, they would love these shows and then maybe discover, the .com. Kind of the same thing there. I mean, I think, again, if we can create things that really appeal to the market and create things that really align with user interests and behavior, that's a great onboarding opportunity for them. And then I do think a lot of folks, self-included, get in and then get a little more curious and then start to understand, the AI space better, or start to understand, the social-fi space better. And so I just think that there's an enormous opportunity in Brazil. And I agree with Jack. Like, I've just noticed that a lot of chains don't prioritize Brazil for various reasons. I think, again, because we're built different, and because our biggest focus for a lot of these companies is building authentic user bases. I just see Brazil as a huge opportunity for us and the entire ecosystem.
Well, that's about all the questions I had, but I wanted to kick it back to both of you for any final thoughts. And how can folks? What's the best way to engage? Where should folks go to contact you or to learn more? Maybe Andrew, you want to start with you and then kick it over to Jack?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, like I said before, best way to kind of dive in is head to the website, scale.space. You can follow us on Twitter at Skale Network. My Twitter is at Andrew Saunders.
Yeah. And hey, just want to say this has been a pleasure. We're excited about, if you're in Brazil, excited about, joining this area and geography, please join our community. And as Andrew said, go to the website, join the Discord, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Jack O'Halloran on Twitter. Muito obrigado. Thank you. We are looking forward to, spending more time there. And Aaron, really appreciate you taking time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys coming on. Exciting stuff you're working on, and it's always cool to see. I think 4 or 5 years after I first talked to you guys, like, you guys have went from being like an idea to a thing. So it's always super cool to see that progression. So really appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.